Good evening. I'd like to call to the order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Oregon City Council for October 7th of 2024. If you join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Rawson, would you please take a roll call for Committee of the Whole? Thank you very much. Note that all council members are here with the exception of Ms. Sackerman, who I do know had a prior engagement for the evening, but also joining us this evening is Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, Law Director Melissa Purpura, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Finance Director Nick Roman, and Building and Zoning Commissioner Stephen Schreit. Folks, moving into our agenda, first item we have is persons or delegations for the evening. We do not have anybody to speak at this time. They'll reserve the right if they want to towards the end of the meeting, which I just spoke to them about. So we will move right into our agenda. First item on our agenda this evening is item 163 of 2024, being presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Law Director Melissa Purpura, and we'll go to Ms. Purpura.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is entering into a contract with NEMSIS. It's to provide managed network services for the Oregon Municipal Court at a monthly cost of $2,720. The basis of this contract would be to provide managed network services for the court. As everyone knows, the court has distinct functions, which include posting a bond, which needs to be done in a timely manner, the recording of hearings and trials, the clerking of charges in warrant service, and as a basis of that, they need to enter into an agreement with a company to provide this managed network services that can respond in a timely manner. They did review two other vendors, and based upon these distinct functions, they felt that this company was the most suitable vendor for providing these services. This is a one-year period. However, it's a month-to-month agreement. And at the end of the term, there is a possibility for renewal. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Council.
Mr. President.
Mr. Slander.
Thank you, Mr. President and Ms. Purpura. I did receive a question on this from a citizen regarding just asking is this something that is not provided by our in-house IT?
Mr. President, Mr.
Ms.
Slander,
Purpura.
that is correct. It is not provided by our internal IT director. However, I did speak to him regarding this contract, went over it with him. He is very familiar with this group, and he was in support of it. He had a lot of positive things to say. And the reason that the court has to have these services is just because of the timeliness of what needs to be done. So as a result of that, they need to go with a separate vendor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slander. Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 163 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President? Oh, is it you?
Mrs. Pauloff.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. Seconded by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mrs. Pauloff, seconded by Mr. Drake to move item 163 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 163 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on to item 164 of 2024, being presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Police Chief Brandon Began, and we'll go to you, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is to seek approval to enter into a contract with the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to provide criminal justice information services through the Northwest Ohio Regional Information Services, also known as NORIS. This is our yearly contract. They provide records management and support, which is essential for our department's function. There was a slight increase year over year of about 7.5%, but part of that was an additional charge for mandatory multi-factor authentication services that we have to put in place as a security feature. Be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Council. Any questions on 164? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 164 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Pollitt.
so moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Pollitt.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Slander. Thank you, Mr. Slander. Motion by Mrs. Pollitt, seconded by Mr. Slander to move item 164 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 164 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on our agenda to item 165 of 2024, being presented again by Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, and Police Chief Brandon Began. Are we going to Mr. Mazer? Mr. Mazer.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, council. This ordinance would allow us to enter into a grant agreement with the Department of Justice. This is a grant that we had applied for last year. We had just now gotten the official grant agreement from the agency. So it's $963,000. We had a press conference on this earlier today with Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. She was here today because she was very instrumental in us getting this grant. This actually went through her office in the appropriations bill, but then settled into the Department of Justice COPS program, which is the Community Oriented Policing Service. So the $963,000 goes towards several items, but the biggest highlights of this are this would reintroduce the K-9 unit to the police department. So in your packet is the grant agreement itself. And if you look at one of the appendices, it lists out line items of all the items that we're planning on purchasing in this grant. So 2 K-9 units, that includes the vehicles, that includes the training for the officers, that includes the actual dogs themselves. So that's a big part of this. We do have a big update we'd like to make to the police training facility. It's a simulator. That's a big line item, probably the single biggest line item. And then the other items include like some lights for the bikes, for the flock cameras. If you recall, we talked last year about adding into the budget, appropriating money for the flock cameras, which are basically the license plate reading cameras that we would place throughout the city, and they would be networked in regionally. And I would say, and also a Sprinter van for the special response team is another large line item. We also got some crisis throw phones out of this, and some other. As you go down the list, you'll see all the smaller items here. But the list is pretty extensive. So this grant was meant to basically modernize a lot of the equipment in our police department, improve our training for the officers, and reintroduce the K-9 program. So it does a lot of things for us. And we certainly have Representative Marcy Kaptur's office to thank for it. So with that, I don't have anything else. I'll ask Mr. President if Chief Began or Assistant Chief Spangler wanted to say anything.
Thank you, Mr. President and Administrator Mazer. Yeah, I would just echo what he said. We got a lot of great equipment that we'll be able to purchase with this. We'll be able to restart up our K-9 unit. And the training that we'll be able to bring in with this will help not only our agency, but also other local agencies who do use our training facilities, because we have such a nice facility up there. So we're very excited about it. Assistant Chief Spangler has handled the majority of the application and the red tape associated with getting this grant. He's been working very hard. Hasn't been very easy. So I just wanted to give him some credit with that. So I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Big, and thank you, Mr. Mazer. Council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Mayor.
I just wanted to reiterate what Chief Began said, is even though Marcy Kaptur provides that the avenue to get it here, without a proper application, it just doesn't happen. And Ryan's on top of his game there. So I want to say a special thanks to that. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, any questions on item 165?
Mr. President.
Mr. Drake.
Yeah, I got a question for Mr. Spangler. Ryan, I know in the past, the license plate readers, you know, I think they worked for a while, and I remember talking to some of the police that they kept dinging and going off when they'd go by a bank or a reflective speed limit sign, or I was just curious if there's new technology where they work better than what they used to.
Yeah, Mr. Drake, Mr. President. So these will actually be stationary cameras, flock cameras that are mounted on poles on the side of the road. And so they are capturing each of the license plates as they go by, up to 2 lanes of travel, always from the rear of the vehicle. And then the program obviously categorizes that by make, model, color, license plate, and the license plate state. It still is up to the officer to validate any hit that they would receive on it. But the advancements to it is you can manually enter a plate that, if say we have a high profiled warrant that we are out there looking, we can enter that into the system and it will hit off of any flock camera when it goes through. So officers can be in the area for it. Same way for like a child abduction or anything like that. So technology is definitely advanced. If there are further advances in this technology, we're basically renting this equipment, if you will, on a yearly basis per camera, is where the expense comes in for this, which was part of the reason why we wanted to seek some grant funding to be able to have that. But you hear all the time on the news, these cameras are getting hits on a regular basis and helping solve crimes, especially in Toledo and those things. It's all one integrated system. So even though it's an Oregon, Ohio camera, anyone that has the flock system is going to have access to that camera, as well as that data that transfers off of it. It's not taking a video of the car. All it's doing is capturing the license plate and then categorizing it from there.
Thank you. And one other quick question. It was mentioned that there are 2 canine dogs. Is that correct? I'm sure one would probably be used for drugs. What would the other one, like for dead bodies or?
Mr. Drake, Mr. President, so both of these canines will be dual purposed. They'll be purposed for drug detection as well as for tracking purposes. So they will both be dual purpose canines. That they'll be detecting drugs in traffic stops. They'll be doing tracking for suspects that choose to run from us out there, as well as they'll even be doing some building search type of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Thank you, Assistant Chief Spangler.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. How long is the data saved for, and what happens to the data? Because 99% of the people don't have a warrant out for their arrest, and what happens to that data for average Joe citizen that just happens to drive by and get their stuff captured?
Mr. President, I don't know the exact timeline off the top of my head that's stored in there. But these license plates, when they do get logged in there, nothing happens with the license plates. It just sits on a server unless we search for it. So, for example, with the robbery for the post office that we had over at Piccadilly, we were able to identify who the suspect was based off of these flock cameras. So we don't sit there and look at the data, but it is stored in there. And if we go back and say, okay, you know, 2 months ago around this time, we had a building that was broke into, you can go back and try to, and you know what type of car it is, you can type in, you know, white Ford and go back through those cameras. So it does capture the license plate and it is stored, but nothing. Assistant Chief Spangler confirmed it is 30 days for that.
Okay.
And then after that, it would be erased. But it is good for us to be able to go back and solve crimes that way. It's been helpful for our department, not only with that. That was probably the highest profile case that we've had. That was all over the news. But our officers are able to use that, our detectives especially, and we've used it to be able to identify suspects on multiple occasions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck. Thank you, gentlemen. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 165 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Spaloff.
so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Spaloff.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Slander. Thank you, Mr. Slander. We have a motion by Ms. Spaloff, seconded by Mr. Slander to move item 165 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 165 is moved to next week's agenda. And again, to the entire department, thank you for your work on this. Moving forward to item 166 of 2024, which is being presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Finance Director Nick Roman. Mr. Roman?
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance would allow us to enter into a renewal agreement for our liability insurance through the Ohio Plan and for our cyber coverage through Tokyo Marine, which are both administered by Hylant. We did see just under a 15% increase on the liability side and a 0% increase on the cyber side. The biggest factor in that increase is just our additional property that we added in. The fire station was finally considered finished and put onto our insurance, and then just inflation added about 5%. And then just different vehicles that cost more now, everything has gone up. So if there's any questions, please let me know.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions on item 166? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 166 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to move item number 166 of 2024 to next week's regular meeting agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. We have a motion by Mr. Wallenzeck, seconded by Mr. Reeves to move item 166 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, is there any objection? Hearing none, item 166 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on to item 167, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Building Zoning Commissioner Stephen Schrake. And Mr. Schrake, will go to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is to impose a 270-day moratorium on the acceptance of new applications for new sweepstake terminal cafes, including skill-based amusement machines, games of chance, or any other gaming device. This would allow for us at the zoning to review zoning standards and other regulatory options for new sweepstake terminal facilities, as well as the skill-based amusement machines, games of chance, and other gaming devices. We've had recently a couple inquiries as to what our regulations are in regards to opening these places.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Schrake. And council, I'd also have you note, there was an amendment or an amended version that was given to us. It is attached to your updated agendas with all the changes highlighted in yellow. And what I would say is those basically create a wider base of language to make sure that we are proper in writing the ordinance accordingly. Council, are there any questions on item 167? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 167 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second,
Seconded by Mrs. Pauloff. Thank you, Mrs. Pauloff. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mrs. Pauloff to move item 167 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 167 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on, we are at item 168 of 2024. And again, we'll go to Mr. Schrake.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance would be amending Part 11, Title 5 Supplementary District Uses and structures adopted by establishing a new section, which would be titled Fire Loss Claims, and also establishing a new special revenue fund, Fund 272, Fire Loss Claims, and declaring an emergency. Municipalities across Ohio have implemented or are implementing regulations and standards for fire loss claims. Insurance companies have inquired about the regulations and procedures adopted by the City of Oregon as required by the State of Ohio for fire loss claims. In that inquiry, I noticed that the City of Oregon has not adopted any legislation in regards to the Ohio Revised Code 3929.86, which mandates that delinquent taxes or assessments be paid out of fire loss proceeds, and provides a means for municipal corporations and townships to ensure that buildings or structures that have been damaged by fire are removed, repaired, or secured. The purpose of this code section in the Ohio Revised Code is to deter the commission of arson and related crimes, to discourage the abandonment of property, and to prevent urban blight and deterioration. If the municipality or township, in our case, the City of Oregon, has incurred any costs for repairs, removal, or securing the structure, the cost shall be paid from the proceeds, and any excess funds remain, the balance shall be paid to the insurer. However, the foregoing legislation in the Ohio Revised Code only applies to cities and townships that have enacted a resolution or ordinance authorizing this procedure and have filed a certified copy of the resolution or ordinance for public record with the superintendent of insurance. So therefore, I am bringing forward this legislation to address fire losses.
Thank you, Mr. Schrag. Just a point of clarity, because we have a discrepancy in the language. The agenda item we have does not indicate this is an emergency. It appears that it is in the language, in the body of the text. Are you wanting this considered as an emergency measure?
No, sir, it does not warrant having to be an emergency.
Okay, we'll adjust that so it goes through as a standard measure, not as an emergency. Council, questions on item 168 of 2024?
Mr. President,
Ms. Spaloff.
I have a statement. For quite a few years, we've had homes that have unfortunately have burned down, and the residents have either took the money and run and left the buildings and structures empty. I am so glad to finally see this in our books, because if you go into other municipalities anywhere, you'll see burned up or boarded up homes that are sitting like that for years. And this will help that from happening in Oregon. So thank you very much, Mr. Strike, for all your due diligence with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spaloff. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to move item 168 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Seconded by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. We have motion by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mr. Drake to move item 168 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, is there any objection? Hearing none, item 168 of 2024 will be moved to next week's agenda. I'm going to go back to Mr. Schrake. We had one item that came in late after deadline last week. I'm going to have Mr. Schrake speak briefly about that. We will likely bring it forward next week to be voted, but we'll let Mr. Schrake go ahead and tell us a little bit about that one. Mr. Schrake?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Lucas County Emergency Management Agency has updated the Lucas County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. In accordance with state and federal requirements, the county is required to update this plan every 5 years. The hazard mitigation plan will identify ways that Lucas County can mitigate the harmful impacts associated with a variety of natural and man-made hazards. Examples include winter storms, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, and windstorms. The plan will allow for a multi-jurisdictional and interdisciplinary approach to address mitigation planning. What they have asked us to consider is essentially a housekeeping item to adopt the updated Lucas County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan, which I will make available to council this week and plan to bring it forward for adoption at the next council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council, any questions on what Mr. Drake was discussing, or Mr. Schrake was discussing? Obviously, we will see text and information on that later this week. Since we're together, I wanted him to at least have the opportunity to bring that forward and take any questions if we may have any at this time. Are there any questions? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Schrake, much appreciated. With all the items on the agenda being considered, we will move on to the mayor's report. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. But at this time, I have no report.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mazer?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of quick updates. Grange Street, the owner did come in today and pull the permit for the demo of the house. But that doesn't let them off the hook either. So we're also continuing to get quotes and take it through the enforcement process, just to hold them accountable. Now, they've said 30 days, which we all felt in the office was reasonable, to give them a 30-day period to have the demolition completed by then. If not, then we will advance that forward for demolition on that house. And we do have funds available from the previous appropriation for that, we believe. So once we get our quotes back, we'll know more. And another update of the Freeway Plaza, we're also getting quotes back for the demolition of that building and also call it the site restoration work. That one's a little bit more. We don't have enough funds appropriated for that at this time. So in talking with the finance director, Nick Roman, we'll discuss it internally, but we're looking at bringing forth legislation to appropriate funds for that demolition. If we don't use the funds, that would be great. If we do, then we'll go through the process, abate the nuisances, restore the site, and recoup those costs, hopefully through some type of land sale or transfer or foreclosure process. So that's what we're hoping to do. We'll continue down that process, but we did, as you saw in the weekly update, we did speak with a potential developer for that site. They seem very interested in opening up a location there. So we don't feel that going through this process will disrupt that in any way. We were very forthright with them. They do know what we're planning on doing, and they were in their take, proceed as you normally would. We're going to continue to proceed as we normally would. But likely, if they were to strike a deal with the property owner, they wouldn't close on the property until sometime in April of 2025. So that said, that's all I have on those. Those are my updates, and I'll take any questions, but that's all I have for my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazer. And Mayor, did you have something to add?
I did. Mr. Mazer triggered some things that came current in my head now. And one of them, when he said about the demo of the Freeway Plaza, we also believe that the old Midwest Eye Clinic will be demolished before the end of the year. And then you'll see some sheet signs going up. So it's going to move a little faster. Even though people get a little nervous seeing that it does not get announced always at the sheets locations, but they like to do their projects on schedule, thing at a time. And another thing is, I know council very concerned about different land purchases we have made in the past in our industrial area. And you've seen different industrial possibilities we've had there. And people get a little mixed emotions about what is really going on. But as part of the process, the city of Oregon, to be recognized as a real player in the industrial market, the city wasn't taking that serious until we start going to entertain some of those projects that could possibly come our way. With those projects that we entertained has put us on the map where we actually get people looking at our site quite regularly. Mr. Mazer, Melissa, and myself, we've stepped up our game to look at different possibilities that we think could be real good fits for the city of Oregon. And there's people expressing interest quite regularly. We hope to be able to deliver some great information or great news to you guys if we're able to secure one of those such sites and see that all the effort we put into assembling land could have a real big payoff.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just, we had the groundbreaking, or I shouldn't say groundbreaking, but ribbon cutting ceremony tonight for the pickleball courts. It was well attended. It's being named after Judge Petroff, as everyone knows. It was a real nice event, and I thank Mr. Borton and the mayor for putting that on. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mrs. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to reiterate the words from earlier today. I really appreciate Chief Began and Chief Spangler and all the work that they did for that grant. It's so well deserved, and I'm so glad that you have were awarded it to really build up upon the fire or the police department. Sorry, Ryan. I got a lot in my head right now. But I really do appreciate all the hard work that you did. It was a really great press conference. I really appreciated all the great words, especially from Councilman Salander and Councilman Drake. We all got to speak. It was really good to celebrate that with you. And really, I want to thank you for everything that you do for the police department. With that being said, I would like to also mention that this week is Fire Prevention Week. And if I may, if I could turn it over to Chief Mullins so he could give us a little bit of what's going on with the fire department this week.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We started our kickoff at Ballman Ford this last Saturday with over 200 attendees to that event. We had the Oregon Fire Museum with the antique fire truck, State Farm, as well as the fire escape house. And that event was attended really well. Last year we did this event and we had probably about 75 people. This year we did really well with that, had over 200 attendees, and we're very, very happy with that. We've already started our Fire Prevention Week with a few preschools, and today was one of them, Kateri. We had 19 little kids out there, which was a really, whenever you have the little ones out there, you always get interesting questions, like the water and everything that's inside of it. So the fire truck. We'll follow up with that this week with Coy Star, Wind Center, and Kateri K-4. Also this Wednesday, October 9th, is the open house at Station 41 from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll have the Oregon Fire Museum there, as well as State Farm. The American Red Cross will be there to sign up for free smoke alarms. Now, we have a smoke alarm program within the city of Oregon that we sponsor, and we install those smoke alarms free of charge. And we get that through the Red Cross as well. So working with them, they'll be there for the sign up for free smoke alarms anywhere in the city of Oregon. Myers will be on hand, not necessarily on hand, but they'll be donating the donuts and the cider. The antique fire truck will be there, as well as all kinds of demonstrations. There'll be a kids obstacle course where at the end of that obstacle course, they take the fire hose and they get to actually use the fire hose to squirt real water through the fire hose and squirt a house. They have a blast. Also, we'll have the fire escape house there as well. And then we'll be raffling off fire extinguishers, CO alarms, and some kids' fire gear that was donated by somebody that I might know. So it's going to be a great time. October 9th, once again, at Station 41, 6 to 8 p.m. Love to see you there.
Thank you, Chief Mullins. Ms.
Thank
Pollock,
you. That ends
anything?
my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock. Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Mr. Slander.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from a standing committee, but looking forward to the open house and seeing all that. Can I go through the kids thing too? Or is there age limits? Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Do they get to squirt each other with the hose?
Could be an interesting afternoon then. Mr. Drake.
I have no report from my committee. I just want to thank Assistant Chief Spangler and Began. I know there was something on Facebook that somebody screenshotted and sent it to me because, as you all know, I don't do Facebook about people knocking on doors at about midnight in our neighborhood. And for whatever reason, and they were out of town for training, and they made sure that that night they would have extra patrol. And I think I got home from the casino that night at about 1:30, and there was police everywhere in New Eastmoreland. So kudos to you guys and police that were checking things out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. And from my standing committee, just a brief update for anybody who wasn't there or wasn't available to it last week. We had a community event regarding our strategic master plan or the comprehensive plan over at Buffalo Rock, even though they're not officially open yet. They opened for the event. I don't know that we got a final count, but I would say it was somewhere between 80 and 90 people that were there. Got a lot of great input, a lot of great discussion around that. And a lot of people that had not taken the survey as of yet with promises as they left that they would take care of it if they didn't do it there. So I would consider it a very successful night with gaining information and gaining input from our community. And with that, I would end my report and I would seek a motion. We're still good? Seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Seconded by Mr. Salander. Motion by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mr. Salander to adjourn. Council, any objection? Hearing none, meeting is adjourned.